A guide to growing chives. This crop is closely related to onion and garlic, with a flavor somewhere in between the two. It's thought that chives have been cultivated since the Middle Ages, but they only became wildly popular in the 19th century. Chives are an excellent source of vitamins and minerals, and they pair well with fish and potatoes. Chives varieties. Common chives. They are grass-like, have a mild onion flavor, and are great for growing indoors over the winter. Chinese chives or garlic chives. This variety has broader leaves than normal chives, with a mild flavor between garlic and onion. Curly chives. This variety has flat, curled, and twisted leaves with large pink flowers. These chives are perfect for growing in a rock garden. Groulau chives. A Swiss variety ideal for growing indoors. It has thick leaves and a strong flavor. When starting seeds indoors, use a tray or any other shallow container. Fill the pot with soil, then sprinkle the seeds on the surface. Ideally, there should be about 4 seeds per 1 inch of soil. When directly sowing outside, work some organic matter into the top 6 to 8 inches, 15 to 20 centimeters of the soil. Keep the soil moist to support the chive plant's root growth. Spread the seeds in a sunny spot so that wet seedlings can dry quickly. This will help prevent the spread of diseases. Whether indoors or outdoors, seeds need light to germinate, so don't cover them too heavily with soil. As well, their ideal temperature to start germinating is between 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 to 21 degrees Celsius. Once the seedlings are 1 to 2 inches tall, 2.5 to 5 centimeters, thin and separate the chives, then plant them again about 3 inches, 7.6 centimeters apart. This allows them to really grow and thrive. Chives prefer soils with a pH between 6.0 and 7.0. As well, they can tolerate a wide range of conditions, like acidic, droughty, damp, or low fertile soils. Keep the plants watered evenly throughout the season by adding about 1 inch of moisture each week. When there's not a lot of rainfall, chives should be watered deeply so that the area around their roots doesn't dry out. Chives spread about 12 inches, 30 centimeters across, and should be broken up and separated at that point. To do this, plants should be watered a few hours before being divided to soften the soil and to keep the plants firm. Next, identify the individual parts of the plant, carefully taking them out of the soil. Clumps can be broken by gently dropping one on a hard surface. This breaks the plant up into smaller clumps, which can then be replanted about 12 inches, 30 centimeters apart. Like other perennials, chives will benefit from this division every 3 to 4 years. Regular cutting keeps chives healthy and encourages them to spread. It also helps to pick their flowers to keep them from going dormant in warm weather. Weed control is especially important when starting plants outside. Chives are not very competitive in their first 2 months due to their slow growth, so weeds should be kept under control. Chive plants also need to get plenty of light, especially if they're being grown inside during the winter. When growing chives indoors, make sure that the pots and containers that are being used have holes in the bottom for good water drainage. There are no fertilizers needed if chives are planted in reasonably fertile soil. But if they're harvested frequently, then they'll benefit from side dressing using a 21:0:0 fertilizer in the 2nd and 3rd month of their growing season. Simply apply 1 teaspoon of this solution per square foot, 0.09 meters squared. To fertilize using compost, do not use more than 1 inch of well-composed organic matter per 100 square feet, 9.2 meters squared. Also, when growing chives indoors, they shouldn't be fertilized during the winter months. Organic mulches like leaves, straw, or wooden chips can be applied to chives to help contain moisture and control weed growth. Chives are happiest when directly sown outside. Seeds can also be started indoors, then transplanted once the ground outside reaches the right temperature. This is helpful in regions where the ground is too cold for too long. Before transplanting, harden off the seedlings by setting their pots outside a few hours per day. At first, they should be sheltered from the wind and hot sun. This hardening off process can be started about a week before transplanting. Chives seeds need about 6 to 8 weeks until they're ready to be transplanted outside, but make sure the frost danger in the region has completely passed. When setting chives outside, space the divided clumps about 8 to 12 inches, 20 to 30 centimeters apart. Chives improve the flavor of carrots and tomatoes and are a good companion for brassicas, broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, turnip, because they help to repel aphids, carrot flies, and Japanese beetles. As well, chives can be grown with lettuce, celery, strawberries, mint, parsley, and potatoes. Chives are a bad influence on the growth of beans and peas, so they shouldn't be planted together. Pots or containers. These are a great space-saving way to grow chives in a home, on the balcony, or in the garden. These containers should have holes in the bottom for good water drainage, and that they're a good size. If the containers are too small, that can result in a lack of water and nutrient retention for the chives. Choose containers with a depth and width of at least 18 inches, 45 centimeters. Raised beds. These have good water drainage as well as a higher soil temperature, since they're not directly embedded into the ground. Raised beds also make for a more comfortable gardening experience. Directly on the ground. Since chives are very hardy, they can also thrive in a simple growing bed on the ground. Before planting, check the soil's pH and fertilizer needs, as well as if any diseases were previously in the soil. Root maggots. These white worms leave scars and feeding tunnels on the surfaces of crops. They can also cause some extensive root damage because of their feeding habits, and will also affect the growth of seedlings. Here's what to do. If root maggots were problematic in the past, avoid planting root crops in that same spot the following year. If crops are too badly damaged to harvest, they'll need to be removed and destroyed. As well, floating row covers can dramatically reduce the damage done to crops by preventing female flies from laying their eggs. Just keep in mind that row covers are only effective where root maggots aren't already present. Thrips. These are tiny, needle-thin insects that are black, brown, or light yellow in color. Thrips suck the juices of plants while also attacking the leaves and stems. Affected plants will have rough bumps, discolored speckles, or silvering on their leaves. Those leaves can then become distorted, twist, and fall off the plant. As well, thrips can spread many diseases from plant to plant. If the thrip infestation is severe enough, it can kill plants off entirely. Here's what to do. Lots of thrips can be repelled by sheets of aluminum foil that are spread between the rows of plants. Be sure to also remove weeds and debris from the garden bed after frost, and avoid planting next to onions, garlic, or cereals where large numbers of thrips can build up and then transfer onto other crops. Also, use reflective mulches early in the growing season to deter thrips. Spinosad and neem oil can also be used to spot treat heavily infested areas. Finally, release commercially available predators like minute pirate bugs, ladybugs, and lacewings, which are especially effective in greenhouses. For best results, make releases of these predator bugs after first knocking down severe thrips infestations with a spray from the garden hose. Finally, watering plants from above is another effective way to prevent a thrips infestation. Damping off. This is one of the most common problems when starting plants from seed. Seedlings will emerge and appear healthy. Then suddenly they'll wilt and die for no obvious reason. Damping off is caused by a fungus that thrives in moist conditions, and when soil and air temperatures are above 68 degrees Fahrenheit. It can also thrive when soils have too much nitrogen fertilizer. This fungus favors slow-growing, deeply seeded plants. The stems of affected plants become water-soaked and will eventually collapse, while roots become too water-soaked and damaged to function. Older plants can also be affected, and either those older plants become stunted or they will collapse. Damping off can be spread 3 different ways, either in water, by contaminated soil, or on gardening equipment. Here's what to do. When possible, plant disease-free seeds. Keep seedlings moist, but avoid overwatering the seedlings to keep the soil from getting too wet. And try to keep the soil from getting too cold. Raised beds are usually a great option for planting, since raised beds help with drainage. Also, avoid over-fertilizing seedlings, and thin the seedlings out to avoid overcrowding, and to make sure the seedlings are getting good air circulation. If containers are being used, those containers should be thoroughly washed in soapy water and then rinsed in a 10% bleach solution after each use. If any plants are affected with damping off, remove them from the garden and then practice a crop rotation of 2 to 3 years. Downy mildew. This fungal disease thrives in cool, humid climates. At first, downy mildew causes leaves to turn yellow, typically starting from the main vein, then spreading outward. Fungal spores that are grayish, purple, fuzzy spots will then grow on the undersides of leaves. Downy mildew typically affects young, tender leaves, and severe infections can also cause curled and distorted leaves. Sometimes those affected leaves can then become dehydrated and then drop from the plant entirely. When seedlings are affected, their growth is stunted, and downy mildew can also reduce crop yields while acting as an entry point for other diseases. When older plants are affected, in addition to the lesions they get, they will also seem more rigid and narrow as compared to healthy plants. Here's what to do. Plant resistant varieties when possible. Practice good crop rotation. Ensure good air circulation around plants. And water plants early in the morning. This last tip gives the plants enough time to dry out during the day, making those plants less vulnerable to infection. Downy mildew is usually spread when leaves are wet for too long, so it also helps to avoid overhead watering. As well, be sure to keep weeds from growing. Once plants have downy mildew, the best thing to try is to eliminate moisture and humidity around the infected plants. If possible, try to improve their air circulation through selective pruning. In general, downy mildew normally clears itself up in an outdoor garden once the weather warms up, since it doesn't do well in warm temperatures. Also, if there are any infected plants, be sure to remove all crop remains after harvest to avoid reinfection, since this fungus can survive in crop residue. Keep in mind too that downy mildew is much easier to control when a plant's leaves and fruit are kept protected by a copper spray. Copper treatments can begin 2 weeks before the disease normally appears, and when a long period of wet weather is in store. Copper treatments can also start when the disease first appears. Then those treatments can be repeated at 7 to 10 day intervals for as long as the treatments are needed. Pink root rot. A fungus that attacks the roots of a plant, causing those roots to turn from light pink to red and eventually purple-brown. Pink root rot also causes roots to shrivel and stunts the plant's growth, because eventually those affected roots will die back. Infected plants will show signs of nutrient deficiencies and drought, since their roots can't take up water or nutrients. Typically, this disease lives in the soil for several years, and thrives in warm temperatures that are above 75 degrees Fahrenheit, 24 degrees Celsius. Pink root rot is usually caused by soil that's been heavily wet for more than 2 weeks. Here's what to do. Plant disease-resistant varieties if they're available, and try to plant as early as possible so that the bulk of the plant's growth will be in cooler temperatures. As well, long crop rotations of 3 to 6 years with non-susceptible crops will help reduce this pink root rot disease, but it won't get rid of it entirely. Drip watering is a good way to control plants' moisture level, while also avoiding pink rot in the process. As well, plowing and mulching the soil promotes air circulation to fight against this fungus. Finally, soil solarization can also be helpful. Simply cover the ground with a tarp in hot weather so that it traps the heat from the sun in order to kill off the disease. If pink root rot is found in the garden, be sure to remove any and all infected plants. Harvesting. When it comes time to harvest, the whole plant can be cut down to 2 inches, 4 centimeters from the ground, using scissors or a sharp knife. Even the flowers can be used in salads or to flavor vinegars. And since chives belong to the family of onions, their bulbs are edible too. Chives should be harvested 3 to 4 times in the first year. Then after that, they can be cut back monthly. Chives that are grown in pots or containers can be harvested the same way as the ones that are directly in a garden bed. Storage. Chives are most flavorful when freshly cut. In dried form, they'll keep for a long time in a cool, dry place. That way, they'll be ready to use whenever they're needed. Additionally, chives can be frozen, which will maintain their freshness a bit longer while providing indefinite storage time.